What if a billionaire heir from one of the country's most powerful families was forced out of his bubble and ended up meeting a humble young woman who dedicated her life to helping underprivileged children? That's exactly what happened when Ethan Collins crossed paths with Emily Parker, two worlds that were never meant to collide. But against all odds, they fell in love. The problem is, love alone never comes without resistance. When Ethan decided to tell his family about Emily, he didn't just face disapproval. He came up against a carefully planned future that had already been drawn for him. And in the middle of this storm, Victoria Harris appears, the perfect ex-girlfriend in the eyes of the elite, ready to reclaim the place she believes is rightfully hers. What happens when true feelings go head-to-head with power, pride, and manipulation? If you want to discover just how far Ethan and Emily will go in this battle between love and ambition, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story will grip you from beginning to end. Imagine someone used to living at the top of the mountain, where the air is thin, and suddenly being invited to descend into the valley where life beats in a completely different way. That was exactly how Ethan felt when he stepped into that modest neighborhood. For the heir of one of the country's largest corporations, everything seemed far too unusual. Yet life, with its tricks, loves to throw people into unlikely scenarios. And it is in those contrasts that the greatest stories are often born. Emily, on the other hand, had nothing artificial about her. She carried in her eyes a quiet strength, the kind that intimidates without the need to raise one's voice. When she saw Ethan a bit lost, standing awkwardly among children's laughter and peeling walls, she didn't miss the chance to tease. "You don't look like the type who feels comfortable here." Her bluntness struck Ethan in a way he wasn't prepared for, a man so used to hearing nothing but flattery. Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't found in vaults filled with gold, but in the ability to see beauty in the ordinary. Emily had that gift. She saw hope in the smile of every child, even when the future seemed uncertain. Ethan, intrigued, replied, "And you don't look like the type who gets intimidated by anyone." It was as if every word exchanged opened a door to a new universe neither of them had stepped into before. Picture the scene. The millionaire heir, wearing expensive sneakers and carrying an impeccable posture, trying to fit into a place where none of that mattered. On the other side, a simple young woman, sharp-tongued and big-hearted, showing that true greatness is not found in wealth but in the soul. Life has its ironies, bringing together worlds that were never meant to collide, only to reveal that they might actually complete each other. Often we only discover who we really are when we're ripped out of our comfort zone. Ethan, in that neighborhood, felt exposed before a reality he had never faced. Like someone who, accustomed to the silence of a luxury car, steps onto a crowded bus for the first time and discovers how many stories fit in such a small space. The initial discomfort slowly transforms into learning, if there is courage to truly observe. Emily, meanwhile, had no interest in impressing anyone. There was no social makeup in her actions. She was raw, genuine, like strong black coffee without sugar that jolts even the sleepiest person awake. That authenticity was precisely what disarmed Ethan. Coming from a world where every smile had a price, he found in her something priceless: sincerity. And sincerity, in times of masks, becomes an overwhelming force. The greatest transformations arrive when we least expect them. Ethan never imagined that the volunteer project imposed by his university would alter his course. But suddenly, he felt drawn to something bigger than an academic obligation. It was as though the universe had conspired, placing him face to face with someone who dismantled his certainties. Meeting someone like that is like facing a mirror that reveals versions of ourselves we had never recognized. Passion does not erupt like an immediate explosion. It grows like embers, quiet and steady, until it becomes an uncontrollable fire. What began as curiosity soon turned into a desire to understand the woman who refused to bow before powerful surnames. And Emily, though guarded, found herself touched by the vulnerable way he looked at her. Two opposite worlds, unknowingly already walking the same path. Against all odds, the spoiled billionaire and the determined young woman fell in love. Few things make life more intense than an improbable love. the kind that feels pulled straight from the pages of a romance novel. Ethan, overcome by the strength of his feelings, decided it was time to take the next step, to tell his family about Emily. Little did he know, dark clouds were already gathering on the horizon. When Ethan decided to reveal his relationship, he had no idea of the storm that would brew inside his own home. The heavy silence in the Collins mansion was broken only by the sound of Richard's whiskey glass nearly slipping from his hand. He didn't need to raise his voice to make it clear how unacceptable this was. Often disapproval doesn't come through shouting, but through a glance that cuts deeper than any word. Margaret, always calculating, cast that icy look that could turn any room into winter. It wasn't just about Emily, but about what she represented. A crack in the unwritten rules of the family. Deep down, Margaret was already plotting strategies, thinking of alliances, inheritances, and appearances. Love, to her, had never been a priority. What mattered was keeping the game of power intact. In this tense atmosphere, one name inevitably resurfaced: Victoria Harris. Daughter of one of the most influential families, she was the obvious and convenient choice for the Collins. When it comes to alliances between powerful families, it's rarely about affection. It's more like a business contract disguised as romance. Victoria, with her rehearsed charm, had always lingered close, like a card ready to be played. At a party, Victoria appeared as if nothing had changed. With a practiced smile, she greeted Ethan as though she still belonged in that exclusive circle. Some fleeting passions are normal, Ethan, but we both know who you really need by your side. Her words sounded like a reminder of a script already written, leaving no space for improvisation. Yet Ethan's heart no longer fit within old molds. It is striking how, in powerful families, love is rarely considered a legitimate criterion. What matters are surnames, merging fortunes, and maintaining appearances in society. This mentality isn't confined to mansions. It often echoes in everyday families where partners are chosen more for status than genuine connection. How many relationships are truly sustained by pressure rather than authentic affection? The contrast was evident. While Ethan sought authenticity, his family clung to a fabricated idea of perfection. Victoria represented the mold, the flawless image fit for magazines and society columns. Emily, however, symbolized the unpredictable, the piece that didn't fit into the elite's puzzle. And it was precisely for that reason that she posed such a threat to the Collins. When a powerful family feels threatened, the masks fall and the games begin. The Collins' decision was swift and deliberate. Test Emily, expose her, prove to everyone that she didn't belong. This type of strategy isn't unique to millionaires. Even ordinary families often set traps to destabilize relationships they don't approve of. The game can be cruel on any scale. Ethan, though in love, didn't fully grasp the magnitude of the forces rising against him and Emily. The battlefield wasn't just his heart, but his family's pride, reputation, and the power inherited over generations. When a relationship threatens structures that old, the resistance doesn't come with gentle words, but with carefully planned strikes. While Ethan tried to protect what he felt, the gears were already turning. The Collins family would not rest until confronting Emily directly, pushing her to the edge. What had begun as curiosity was about to march into the territory of war. And when the first blow was struck, at stake would not only be a relationship, but the very identity of whoever dared to defy that empire. Emily decided to take Ethan to meet her parents, Michael and Susan Parker. The modest home with old furniture marked by time was the complete opposite of the luxury Ethan had known since childhood. Dinner was prepared with care, but the atmosphere carried something beyond the aroma of food. There was suspicion. The contrast between worlds had never been so evident. With every gesture, it was as though two realities stared at each other in silence. Susan, with her attentive eyes, watched her daughter smile and try to balance the mood. She was a mother who could read between the lines, who understood the unspoken more clearly than words. When she leaned in to ask, in a low voice, if Emily was sure that Ethan understood the weight of living in their world, it wasn't only doubt, it was protection. After all, the pain of rejection can be harsher when born from social differences. Emily responded firmly, saying that Ethan didn't need to live their world, only to respect it. That sentence carried the essence of any true relationship. It isn't necessary to share the same origins to love, but it is essential to value and respect each other's story. How many couples in real life stumble exactly at this point when respect fails to match affection? Ethan, for his part, felt torn between two worlds that had never touched before. He, used to luxury and formality, now found himself seated at a table where every detail told a story of struggle. It wasn't discomfort with simplicity, but an awakening to realities that had always been invisible to him. And this awakening, though silent, stirred him more deeply than any business meeting ever had. The difference in social class is often like an invisible wall. It doesn't need to be mentioned to be felt. Susan and Michael treated Ethan with courtesy, but tension lingered in the air like a rope pulled too tight, ready to snap. This sensation isn't exclusive to fiction. It happens when two families from entirely different contexts meet. Dialogue in those moments isn't carried only by words, but by the heavy silences between them. Ethan tried, through small gestures, to show respect. He praised the food, listened attentively to the stories, and showed genuine interest in learning. Small actions that may seem trivial, but carry enormous weight when done sincerely. As in any relationship, the point is not to impress, but to demonstrate authentic curiosity about the other's world. And there, Ethan was taking his first steps. Along that path, Emily knew that dinner was more than just a meal. It was a test. It was as though every look from her parents carried silent questions. Would he value their daughter? Would he protect her? Would he respect the life she lived? For the Parkers, accepting Ethan meant opening the door to someone from a world as distant as the moon. And opening the door didn't necessarily mean letting him in without caution. The atmosphere of the evening shifted between cordiality and tension. Ethan, deep down, understood that loving Emily wasn't enough. He would also have to win her parents' trust. That is the true weight of differences. It's not just about feelings, but about proving, through actions, that love can overcome barriers. And that night, the first barrier had been raised, one that would need to be faced with courage. While Emily smiled, trying to ease the air, Richard Collins was already plotting the next step. On the other side of town, he planned the first official dinner between the two families. But unlike the Parkers' modest meal, the Collins table would be set like a battlefield. And for the Parkers, the night ahead would not be a simple family gathering, but a merciless test. The hall of the Collins mansion was immaculate. Every detail, from the glittering chandeliers to the arrangement of the crystal glasses, seemed carefully designed to impress. But behind that sophistication lay a darker purpose. This was not a simple welcome dinner. It was a test. For Richard, it was nothing more than a stage set to expose the differences between the families. Michael and Susan Parker entered the room with hesitant steps. Their eyes wandered across the luxury around them, not with envy, but with the discomfort of those who know they are out of place. Every gilded frame on the walls and every shining piece of silverware seemed to remind them they didn't belong to that universe. Yet they stood there, supported by love for their daughter and the courage to face whatever was coming. Emily, seated beside Ethan, tried to remain calm. Her heart pounded, as if each second stretched into an eternity. She knew the evening wouldn't be easy. More than protecting herself, she wanted to shield her parents from the arrogance hanging in the air. Every forced smile was an attempt to defend the Parkers from the Collins' veiled hostility. Richard raised a glass, fixing his gaze directly on Michael and Susan. The words he spoke, dripping with arrogance, landed like venom. You must be impressed with this house. I imagine you've never seen anything like it. It was more than provocation. It was a way of marking territory, of making it clear who held the power. Words at times are sharper weapons than swords. Susan squeezed her husband's hand under the table as if asking for calm without saying a word. The gesture was small but carried immense meaning. Endure humiliation without losing dignity. This is a lesson that extends beyond fiction. How many times in real life have we swallowed offenses to preserve peace, choosing more important battles to fight later? Ethan, seated between the two worlds, felt torn apart. On one side was loyalty to his blood family. On the other, his love and respect for Emily and her parents. This kind of conflict is universal. At some point, everyone has felt divided between external expectations and the desire to protect what truly matters. Ethan's anguish reflected that struggle in every glance. The tension was palpable, as though the air grew heavier with each passing minute. Emily, her eyes brimming with tears, fought to keep them from falling. She knew that if she gave in to emotion, she would hand Richard exactly what he wanted, proof that she wasn't ready for the confrontation. Sometimes strength isn't about defeating the adversary, but about not letting them see your weaknesses. Michael, silent, watched everything with a steady expression. He was not a man of many words, but his silence carried weight. He knew he could never compete with the Collins fortune, but there was something no money could buy: the dignity of his family. Every quiet bite of food was, in itself, an act of resistance. As the evening went on, Margaret watched silently, wearing that restrained smile that hid ulterior motives. The dinner was not the end, but merely the beginning of something greater, and Emily, not yet fully aware, was about to be pulled into an even crueler game of manipulation. In that moment, the battle of glances was only the prelude to a much more intense war. Margaret called Emily for a private conversation, away from everyone's eyes. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a clock, as if each second was part of a trial. On the table, Margaret placed $1 million check, the paper glinting under the light. The offer wasn't just money, it was a weapon loaded with disdain. Emily looked at the check but did not touch it. Her eyes filled with tears of anger, not because of the temptation of the amount, but because of the audacity of that woman to try to buy something priceless. Margaret spoke calmly, as if offering a rational solution, but every word was a stab. This amount can solve your life and your parents. All you have to do is leave my son alone. The young woman stood slowly, as if carrying an immense weight on her shoulders. She didn't need to shout to make her position clear. Her firm voice echoed through the room. You can buy many things, but not the love we feel for each other. In that instant, Emily showed that true strength does not lie in financial power, but in the ability to resist humiliation. The bribe was more than an attempt to drive Emily away. It was the symbol of the arrogance of a family used to believing everything had a price. This behavior isn't restricted to the stories of millionaires. In everyday life, how many times does someone try to buy another person's dignity or decision with favors, gifts, or empty promises? Emily left the room without looking back. Inside, she carried the pain of humiliation, but also the certainty that her love could not be corrupted by papers or numbers. Every step she took echoed like a silent act of resistance. Sometimes the true triumph lies in saying no when the whole world expects you to bow. Margaret, alone, picked up the check from the table with the same coldness with which she had placed it there. To her, there was no defeat, only a shift in strategy. She was the kind of woman who never accepted loss. When one plan failed, another quickly took shape in her mind. Emily had no idea how relentless such opposition could be. Meanwhile, Ethan remained unaware of what had happened. To him, everything still seemed under control, as if facing his family's disapproving looks was enough. Little did he know that Emily carried an invisible burden, the weight of having been treated as someone unworthy of standing by his side. The lack of dialogue between them only deepened the tension. Emily's experience in that room was more than an isolated episode. It was a cruel reminder that loving someone can mean confronting forces far greater than feelings. It is like rowing against the tide in the open sea. Strength alone is not enough. One needs endurance, courage, and faith. This was the silent storm she carried within her heart. Their love was intact but marked by invisible scars. Emily wondered, deep inside, whether this feeling would be strong enough to withstand that family. And, as in every great story, the answer would not come through promises but through the trials yet to come. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a moment of celebration, a preview of the union to come. The table was set with refinement, guests distributed strategically, and the air heavy with expectation. But beneath the surface there was no festive atmosphere. It was a minefield. Emily, seated beside Ethan, felt that every glance directed at her was a silent sentence. Margaret wasted no time making her position clear. With a firm voice, loud enough for everyone to hear, she leaned toward Emily and said, "You will never be welcome in this family." The impact was immediate. It wasn't just words, it was a mark, a scar cast in front of them all. This was not rehearsal. It was confrontation. Emily's parents, Michael and Susan, endured it in silence. They knew the weight of words laced with arrogance, but chose not to respond. Silence often speaks louder than defense. For them, to argue back would be to stoop to the same game of humiliation. Their love for their daughter required resilience, even in the face of the cruelest hostility. In the bathroom, away from the eyes of the guests, Susan held her daughter's hands. She asked with tenderness but also concern, "My dear, are you sure about this? Because if you marry, it will be to face this hostility forever." It was the voice of a mother trying to protect, but without robbing her daughter of the freedom to choose. A mother's love is exactly that. Protection without imprisonment. Emily took a deep breath and replied firmly, "I love Ethan, and I will go to the end." It was not only a declaration of love, but also of defiance. Every word sounded like someone choosing to carry a burden, even knowing its weight. To love, in many cases, is also to decide to endure pains not chosen, but inevitable along the path. Meanwhile, Ethan felt crushed. The dinner that should have united them instead exposed open wounds. He looked at his fiancée, at her parents, and at his own family, and felt his heart torn in two. Protecting Emily seemed obvious, but standing against his parents felt like fighting against his very past. This dilemma turned his soul into a battlefield. The guests noticed the tension and whispered discreetly. A dinner meant to be filled with smiles had turned into a spectacle of unease. This also happens in real life. How many family gatherings end up becoming arenas where masks fall and truths emerge without disguise? The difference here was that everything was written in their eyes. Emily returned to the table with a firm face, though inside she still felt the echo of Margaret's words. It was like carrying an invisible wound. Even so, she remained silent, not out of cowardice, but out of strategy. Sometimes the greatest victory is not to react when everyone expects you to collapse. Before dessert was served, Emily rose and left the table. The movement was discreet but loaded with meaning. Her sudden absence stirred unease. Ethan searched for her with his eyes but couldn't find her. At that moment, the rehearsal dinner ceased being just a family confrontation. It became the prelude to a mystery no one was prepared to face. The rehearsal dinner had ended in tension, but no one imagined what would come next. Emily quietly rose from the table, as if needing air, and never returned. At first, everyone thought it was just a pause, perhaps to compose herself. But as time passed, the silence grew unsettling. Ethan began to sense that something was wrong. He searched the entire mansion. He walked through the hallways, the gardens, even the less frequented rooms. He called her name over and over, but only the echo of his own voice replied. The emptiness of the luxurious spaces seemed to mock his anguish. With each passing minute, his desperation deepened. Emily's phone didn't answer. Ethan dialed again and again, but all he heard was the voicemail. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. A crushing sense of helplessness overtook him, a mix of fear and disbelief. It was impossible to accept that just 2 days before the wedding, his bride had simply disappeared. The mansion, once merely cold, now became a maze of shadows. The guests had already left, leaving behind only whispers of the incident. For Ethan, every look seemed to ask, had Emily given up? The doubt hurt as much as her absence. In that moment, love turned into panic. Ethan wasted no time. He rushed to Emily's apartment, hoping to find her safe. But what awaited him was even more disturbing. The wedding dress still intact inside its box, as if waiting for a day that might never come. The contrast between the promise of marriage and the emptiness of her absence was suffocating. He shouted her name through the apartment, but there was no reply. Every empty corner reinforced the feeling of abandonment. It was as though Emily had left behind not only the dress but also hope itself. The silence of that night became a cruel enemy. Ethan's heart pounded out of rhythm. His mind tried to piece together rational explanations. Had she changed her mind? Had she been pressured to the point of fleeing? Or was she in danger? Each possibility gnawed at him more than the last. The fear of the truth weighed as heavily as her absence. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent to the unfolding drama. Cars passed by. People laughed in bars. Life continued as if nothing had happened. But for Ethan, the world had stopped. It was as if fate had pulled the rug out from under him, leaving him with nothing to stand on. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the apartment, hands on his head, crushed by the weight of loss. The image of Emily smiling, so vivid in his memory, clashed painfully with the emptiness of the present. Just days before the wedding, a dream had turned into a nightmare. And one question echoed, sharp and merciless: where was Emily? The first hours after Emily's disappearance were the longest of Ethan's life. He went through familiar places, called friends, knocked on neighbors' doors, but no one had any news of her. It was as if she had been swallowed by the silence of the night. Each failed attempt struck his heart like a blow. The absence of the woman he loved was unbearable. At the Parkers' home, the atmosphere was heavy with anguish. Michael and Susan received Ethan with weary faces, but also with helplessness. They themselves had no word from their daughter. The pain of a father and mother was intensified by uncertainty, and with every minute without answers, hope crumbled a little more. The police were called. After 24 hours, Emily was officially declared missing. The questions began piling up. Had she run away by choice? Had she been pressured to the extreme? Or had someone planned it all? The possibilities, instead of comforting, only widened the pain. The mystery became a bottomless pit. Meanwhile, the media turned the case into a spectacle. Headlines appeared in newspapers and on television. Bride disappears before saying I do to Colin's heir. Reporters crowded at the mansion gates. Cameras hunted for every expression of those involved, and the suffering of a family became fuel for public curiosity. Privacy no longer existed. Ethan, exhausted, fell to his knees before his in-laws. His eyes carried absolute despair, as if he had lost not just a person, but his very reason to live. With a trembling voice, he swore, I will find her, even if I have to turn the world upside down. It was the vow of a broken man, yet still determined. The Parkers, even devastated, saw sincerity in his words. Michael, silent, knew that this promise might be the only spark of hope in the darkness. Susan, with tears in her eyes, simply held Ethan's hand as if saying, don't give up. Despair, when shared, turns into strength to endure. But not everyone shared that feeling. In the Collins mansion, Emily's disappearance was met with coldness. For Richard and Margaret, perhaps it was merely confirmation of what they had always believed. She did not belong in that world. Their silence spoke louder than any public statement. It was in this setting that Victoria reappeared. With a calculated air, she offered words of comfort to Ethan, as if pouring balm onto an open wound. But along with the comfort came poison. Her insinuations planted seeds of doubt about Emily's loyalty, suggesting that perhaps she had left of her own will. Ethan's despair now mingled with confusion. His heart was already in pieces, but hearing those insinuations was like salt on the wound. He didn't want to believe it, yet pain made it difficult to separate reality from suspicion. Amid the storm, one certainty grew. Emily's disappearance was not just a tragic event. It was the beginning of an even crueler game, where love and truth would be tested to their limits. Emily's disappearance weighed heavily on everyone, but inside the Collins mansion, the truth began to surface. Ethan discovered that his mother had offered money to drive Emily away. The revelation struck him like thunder on a clear night, impossible to ignore. Every detail of that bribe echoed as an unforgivable betrayal. He confronted Richard and Margaret with contained rage, but unshakable resolve. "You did it! She's gone because of you!" The words cut like blades, filled with pain and indignation. For the first time, Ethan wasn't speaking as a son, but as a man determined to stand against his own parents. The mansion's grand hall became a courtroom. Margaret, cold as ever, retorted, "She was never worthy of you, and now she's gone because she knew it." It was as if Ethan's pain was invisible to her, as though everything was merely a matter of calculation and convenience. There was no space for empathy, only the preservation of pride and power. This was the matriarch's true face. Richard remained silent, but his presence weighed as heavily as his wife's words. He didn't need to speak for his approval to be clear. A father's silence often wounds more than any explicit condemnation. Ethan felt as though he were fighting against a wall built from decades of tradition and coldness. Victoria seized the moment to draw closer. With a calculated smile, she touched Ethan's arm and whispered, "You know you can't rely on fleeting passions." It was the voice of someone exploiting pain to offer a convenient escape. But Ethan, for the first time, pushed her away coldly. There was no room left for illusions. That gesture marked an awakening. Until then, Ethan had lived torn, trying to reconcile love with his family's expectations. But now, faced with the real possibility of losing Emily, he understood there was no middle ground. Either he fought against everything and everyone, or he surrendered to the game his family had always controlled. The pain of Emily's disappearance turned into fuel. Each tear that fell reminded him of what was at stake. It was as if their love was a flame surrounded by hostile winds, but still burning. And Ethan realized that, if he wanted to keep it alive, he would need to shield that flame with all his strength. As the tension thickened, the police brought unexpected news. A lead suggested Emily had been seen in a nearby city. It was little, almost nothing, yet it meant hope. And in moments of despair, even the faintest spark can become a torch. Ethan clung to that possibility as a drowning man clings to air. In that moment, a new chapter unfolded. The search was no longer just the cry of his heart. It became a race against time. Emily was somewhere out there, and Ethan knew he had to find her before it was too late. The truth was only beginning to emerge, and it would bring with it more pain and harder choices. Emily spent days hidden away in a modest hotel, far from every watchful eye. The silence of the room was heavy, as if each wall carried the doubts that tormented her. She barely slept, tossing and turning between the love she felt for Ethan and the humiliations she had endured. Her mind was a battlefield, and the future seemed like an unsolvable riddle. The next morning, she made a decision. She dressed simply, but her eyes carried a new firmness. She returned to the Collins mansion where everyone awaited her with expectation. Each step through the corridor echoed like an announcement. She had not come to beg for acceptance, but to assert her own choice. Her heart pounded, yet her voice was steady. When she entered the hall, she found Ethan with tears in his eyes, Richard and Margaret in calculating silence, and Victoria watching from a distance. Emily took a deep breath, looked at each of them, and spoke clearly. "I heard every word, every humiliation. And I ask you, Ethan, are you willing to fight them for me, or will you always remain the obedient son of Richard and Margaret?" Silence filled the room. Ethan, his face marked by pain, stepped forward. Tears streamed down, but his voice was firm. "I only want you, Emily. Nothing else matters." It was the confession of a man stripped of masks, finally placing love above power and family. But was it enough? Emily held the ring on her finger and gazed at it for a moment. The cold glimmer of the metal seemed to carry the weight of her choices. Then she handed it back to Ethan. Her eyes shone with both pain and determination. "I don't want this for my life." Sometimes the courage to leave is even more painful than the courage to stay. Turning to Richard and Margaret, she lifted her chin and declared, "My parents are wonderful people. They taught me that dignity has no price, that true wealth is character and love. We don't need to endure what we did by your side these past days. The wedding is canceled." Her voice rang out like the strike of a gavel dot. The impact was devastating. Ethan tried to stop her, running to her side and grasping her hand. "Emily, please, I love you, let me prove it." His plea was genuine, but Emily looked at him firmly. "It's decided, Ethan. Leave me alone, please." Her words cut like blades but carried the dignity of someone who knew her worth. Emily left the mansion without looking back. Each step was liberation, even though it hurt. Ethan stood still, motionless as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Inside the mansion, Richard and Margaret exchanged satisfied glances, like generals winning a battle without raising their swords. But the war was far from over. The echo of that decision would resonate not only that night, but in the days to come. Emily had stood against an empire and chosen herself above all else. The love was still alive, but now it was wounded, marked by scars. And in stories like this, scars never disappear. They only wait for the next chapter to reveal their strength. In the Collins mansion, the breakup between Ethan and Emily was a cause for silent celebration. Richard and Margaret, satisfied, believed they had won the battle. Margaret even began inviting Victoria frequently to dinners, as if arranging the replacement of the bride without bothering to hide her intentions. But behind the cold walls of that house, something was beginning to change in Ethan. On one of those nights, while Victoria tried to impose her presence with calculated charm, Ethan exploded. He stood up in the middle of dinner, his voice filled with indignation. "Enough of this attitude. I love Emily and I will do everything to win her back. Victoria, go live your life. You will never be the woman for me. And as for you two..." Silence fell heavily over the table. Richard's eyes burned with fury. "If you do this, you will lose your position in the company. You will inherit nothing." The words came as final threats, as if power alone could keep his son bound. But Ethan took a deep breath and answered firmly, "Don't bother threatening me. Tonight I will resign. I don't want anything that comes from you." The shock was immense. Margaret, used to steering the family's course with invisible hands, never expected such defiance. Ethan was not only breaking with his parents, but also with the empire that had always sustained his life. It was like cutting off his own roots, a gesture of courage few would dare to make. The weight of that decision was irreversible. That very night, Ethan went upstairs, packed his bags, and left the mansion. He moved into a modest hotel, far from the luxuries and privileges that had always surrounded him. He began living independently, gathering strength to rebuild from nothing. Every day he called Emily, but the calls went unanswered. Waiting became a test of endurance. A week passed, until one Tuesday morning, while running downtown, Ethan saw her. Emily, crossing the street, entered a cafe. His heart raced as never before. He followed her, stepped inside, and found her seated. He approached slowly, cautiously, as if afraid of startling the most important person in his life. "Hi, I really need to talk to you. I need you," Ethan said nervously. Emily looked up, surprised. Longing overflowed in both their eyes, and within seconds they embraced in the middle of the cafe, unconcerned with the onlookers. It was as if the world had stopped to grant them that moment. Their love, though wounded, revealed its strength. Seated in a quiet corner, Ethan began to speak. He told her he had left his parents, the mansion, the company. He revealed he was starting from scratch with the help of a college friend. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. "I want you by my side, Emily, only you." These weren't empty promises, they were proof of transformation. Emily watched him silently. Her tearful eyes reflected surprise, pain, and hope. This was no longer the man torn between family and love, it was someone who had finally chosen. At last she smiled with emotion. "You took your time, but you finally understood. And I still love you, Ethan." There, in the embrace and the kiss that sealed their reunion, they decided nothing would separate them again. After so many battles, tears, and painful choices, Ethan and Emily finally realized that the true value of love wasn't found in mansions, fortunes, or prestigious last names. They decided they didn't need the Collins' approval to be happy. What truly mattered was what they were building together. Simple and sincere. That's why they chose to celebrate their union in a completely different way. A small, intimate ceremony with only a few close friends and Emily's parents present. No spotlight, no luxury, no appearances. Just true love, genuine laughter, and promises of a life where dignity and respect would be the foundation. And now I ask you, how many times have you found yourself trapped in expectations that weren't even your own? Isn't it time to choose a simpler path, one that's truly yours? Ethan and Emily showed us that real happiness doesn't need an audience. It only needs courage to choose what really matters. If this story touched you and made you reflect on your own choices, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way you'll continue to follow inspiring stories like this one and learn lessons that can transform the way you see love and life.